Look at this. I don't even have to do that. Anyways, I'm going to be tying the critter minnow. I found that if I don't have my eyes present, I'm learning. So, staying pretty consistent to the theme of some flies that are my creations. I don't know why air quote that. These are all the fly. I mean, even the dungeons that I tie are, they got my own little stank on them. But this one, like the swim bug, like the loaf, it's really the only two that I would call mine. I'm going to do a hook comparison. It's to answer a question or a problem, provide a solution for something that, you know, with the dungeon, with that stank that I put on them. Maybe it's UV in the front. Maybe some have, you know, bigger eyes, sparser head, get down. So it's just these little variations that I like to see as that fly for me, and then also within that tweaking some things along the way for just some different looks, sizes, sync rates, brass eyes versus lead, casting implications for clients, all that stuff. So with this, it was catching striper on big flies in the river. I don't need to have this on yet. See me learning? And getting down the lake, and they're blowing up bait, and in this environment, it's, you can be fishing, that's the South Holston and the Watauga, you can be fishing the tailwaters and then be in the lake in that transition zone of the tailwater, trout water getting into the lake. You know, there's carp, smallmouth. You'll start seeing largemouth as you get closer to where it's more lakey. But there's lake run rainbow, there's lake run brown, and there's striper. And when bait is there, there are fish there. Weird how that works. When bait is doing things that bring them up to the surface, or bring them in areas that are shallow enough to get schooled, they will get eaten on the surface. And they're not eating anything. So, you know, I'll be catching fish in the river, and I'll be fishing for browns and striper effectively the exact same way, fishing big flies. And I'm not saying you go out and find success, but when it's bitey, when you're seeing activity, it's completely different in the lake, and they simply won't eat. This sounds stupid saying this, but an aha moment was getting down the lake. This was the next morning, and seeing him going, and I hadn't realized, this is when I had just gotten here. I was fishing a lot. I hadn't realized how small the shad were that they were eating. So I was thinking, you know, shad, like a fat-bodied, tall, 3, 4. I mean, some of those gizzard shads, which there are those, right? There are 9-inch shad. There are what they're eating a lot of, referred to as rain bait, because it sounds like that's me sprinkling onto the water. And it looks like that too. It looks like you're throwing sand if you just went. They'll all spray in one direction, and those are inch and a quarter, maybe inch and a half threadfin shad. And to throw out they'd eat the shit out of that. But to throw out a bigger fly, we're getting up to too big. Yeah, four. It's 4.5, quote unquote, with those tails at the end. That's too big. If you can get this in, even the clousers, even like small clousers that is that, yeah, there's like nothing there. Even the small clousers would just, unless they're tied super sparse, just they don't look right. So I wanted something that's going to stay sort of on the surface, fishing and floating, intermediate line, or even, heaven forbid, you're cruising around there and whatever, you're fishing big stuff. You can, with something buoyant, you can still keep it in the zone for long enough. A lot of these times they're blowing up, and that's you need to be casting. You need to have a fly in there at that point, because just think about where the food is. It's where the fish are blowing the fish up or proximate to that. And yeah, so this thing's just super easy casting, really small, and kind of sticking with the natural material. I do this in craft fur too, and I'll do it in just craft fur, but that's not unique. So I wanted to get a fly that would ride in the surface, fishing, floating, or intermediate, even maybe get down just a little bit, floating. Some of them, I got this. There's just a lot more material in this one, deer hair wise. I'll figure. Should I block my eyes? So this will stay up. This is kind of for the last light. Once you start talking about opacity, we'll be here for the rest of the time. So depending on how much UV you're using, it's negative buoyancy. That'll take a buoyant fly and have it ride down a little more. Implications for all hair bugs. But once you take that, put some UV, super wide gap hook, you'll get that keeling right, and it'll start getting down. So this will probably sink, especially after enough water gets throughout the material. Which I don't mind if I'm fishing floating lines. So again, fishing sinking line, swinging this through guides at one of the shops here started. I tied a bunch for some folks there, and they started fishing them with their clients just because it's super easy to cast, and it's a non-offensive little fly. And if they eat this, you certainly don't have to worry about. I would be tying them on a slightly smaller hook. You don't have to worry about hookups like you do with the articulation, back hook, front hook. That's a whole nother conversation as well. Anyways, the hooks that I like to tie on, kind of depending on the size, are the Gammarus. This has more of a flat part to tie on than the. I'm going to go ahead and kick this thing off. See if I can remember to. Stop it every once in a while. So the Gammarus has a bit more of a straight part on the shank, and then the other one is the XO774 universal curved. I like this one for the small guys. I could convince myself why, but I'm pretty sure it's just because I don't feel compelled to fill up the shank, which I do not need. And it's also just a little bit stouter. It's a more stout wire. So again, comparison being, this is a size 2, this is a size 4. Pretty unconcerned about the hook gap based on what this fly is, but even if I were. Compelling evidence for that smaller size 4. And yeah, just less big gap, less of that straight shank, and a thicker gauge. Are you going to bend the 2 out? No. Could you? Sure. But it's because your set sucks. So if you're... This is a quick tie. If you only get your set to here, or, you know, it's just barely in and you're pulling them in on the point, that's where when you have leverage up here versus back here, this is where you want the fish, and that's where it's not going to bend as much. This is where it's bending, and you hear people talk about straightening hooks out, and that first set is, you know, pull hard. But this thing's just mean. Partridge makes the evil minnow, and then there's a bass minnow. The evil minnow is a dirty, dirty hook. Salt minnow as well. They're really small, and it's a thick gauge. Place I got Partridge hooks for just stopped selling them, or they stopped doing deals. So this size 4 XO774 is a great hook for minnow patterns, also trailer on you know, platform like a triple D where you're doing shank in the middle. Tying with 140 because I picked up that bobbin and started tying, and that's what it had on it. So I'm not going to cut that layer off. I will say, exciting news out of this camp. My camp. I finished all of the 100 strand Vivas. I got an order before vowing to never use it again. And I'd heard great things about Semperfly and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I'm using 50, but I have 100 strand, 150, so my life, it's the little things, and that is actually a significant improvement to not tie hair bugs with 50. I ran out of 100, and it's just, sometimes I wonder about my decision making. I tied this yesterday. This is a great tying video, and I didn't get any sound. So, fun part. Artic Fox. This stuff makes me want to lay down on it. It's so soft. This is a really nice, it was a tail, like a couple of them. They were like 17, 21 inches, so somewhere between, depending on the size of your trout. So this stuff is, you do not need a lot, and I want, you know, that head, the deer hair head is a good chunk of that inch profile, and then this stuff just kind of finishes it off, but it's also translucent, and you can get sort of a fat, still very movie, nicely swimming body without using, you know, bucktail. You're either chopping the tips off and it's not really swimming right. I forget who was, it could have been a gunner video of a 5-inch fiber cut down to 3 inches is not a 3-inch fiber. But you're getting all the natural taper of this, and you lose that. You can get, you know, if you really do some picking for bucktail, a tail that's short, but this is an awesome material, and you can just go pretty sparse on it. And so for the smaller patterns, and that's really long hair, I'm going to be just taking out the long hairs. I get those guard hairs, but also get some of these wiggly, quote-unquote, underfur. but that's really the stuff you want to tie with. And do a more or less reverse, keeping things somewhat on the top of the hook. You can put this in a brush if you're doing a number of these. It's also just sort of a cool product material to put into a brush and work some flash into it. When I'm just doing a couple, since you don't really need much material, I'll just make 2 ties. If you do a brush, you can really just do 1 wrap and then deer hair, and that's it. Takes care of itself. I'm going to put, so this is Ripple Ice, and then a little bit of Lavender Ice Wing, restarting that. Sucker for lavender, given, I think I saw an American shad or hickory shad up close. I remember which one it was, fishing on the Potomac, and it was just like purpley and olivey, and I don't know, the lavender ice wings really, it's got my number. So I'm gonna err on simplicity here. Tie this in. I will occasionally do this over the second tie of fox. And then you can, you know, I'll occasionally put some, just for fun, we'll do it. My wheel, my flash wheel. Do I want this? Yeah, I do. I'm probably going to cut that down. Like that. That's more or less it. At this point, if you're tying with craft fur, you can just put in another reverse and sort of do that air on top deal. But I am going to put deer hair, some deer belly hair. Talk about a pillow. So this is there's a little, it had some bleaching. There's some kind of cool, it's like tanny, beige, 50 shades of taupe. You can probably do 2 spins, especially if you're fishing floating line. You also don't need a lot of length. And what happens when you're doing a shorter pattern or a smaller pattern, shorter's right, it is not as long. This is 1.5 inches to 2 inches shad versus a longer 3-inch shad. You end up getting, if you're just tying with the top part with longer hair, you end up getting and it's just less fun to tie with. So 2 around there. I'm going 3 too, since I have, and that's 4 since I'm using 50 strand. Do I recommend it? No. You can probably get 2 or 3 with 100 and 150. Once you start getting above 150, you run the risk of, especially with tying the drunks. Also, what I'm doing here is as I'm burping and blowing in your face, it tastes like vitamins. What I'm doing here after I get those around and I'm cinching down is I'm holding it and tightening it and then pressing that hair. You can see it. Camera too. So you can encourage not just the hair to get onto the hook shank, you can encourage which part of the hook shank you want it on and at which point during your tension you'd like it to really cinch down. So I'm going to do a spin. I'm going to cut it tight on the bottom. So I'm going to do a spin and then a pencil on top. And then I'll probably do a small spin in front. So right here, everything's folded up. And you want to spin, that's the deer hair folded up. And then as you press down and pull, that fold gets distributed around. So after you go 2 wraps around the deer hair, this is, you see people tying with deer and it's like, oh my god, how are they so good with this? A lot of it's time and practice. A big thing for me was just recognizing that to treat this product, it's the second time I want to say this, to treat this material just as though you would laser dub or wool or flash. There's other materials too. But to, recognize that there are certain characteristics of deer hair that make it good, certain characteristics that make it challenging. All hair is different, so some hair just sucks to tie with. And I would really, one of the many mistakes I've made through this process is trying to make product. I guess we're going with that. Trying to make product work, trying to make material work. I'm not going with it. It just doesn't work. It's shitty hair. I got some hair that I didn't look at, and it sucks. So I should throw it away instead of trying to make it. You can always make something work. Do yourself a favor. So, what I was saying, just treat this like normal material, not some spooky thing, and recognize that there can be little imperfections, and that's totally fine. So after I get that down, I'm doing some mashing as I bring that thread back and around. And here's where, again, like if you catch some hairs right here, not a big deal. Couple whips, half hitches, whatever you want to do. You cinch that down and then bring this back, and you're pushing the thread that's on that hook shank. You're pushing it up into that hair. If you've caught some hair at that point in time, you're gonna snap it right off, and you'll have a clean shank to work with. So that was my spin. We'll tie on top, and then we'll spin one in the front. And you hear stacking and packing. So that's where one on top, one on the bottom, you get different designs. You can put 3, 4, 5 of those little, that second tie that I put in to get the different designs. And then you pack. This is Pat Cohen's. I think it's a fugly packer. So that's the packing part, and it really does make a big difference in terms of the density of the hair. But you can also spin and pack. So the drunk is 3, 4, 5, depending on the size, spins, and during or after each spin, you're packing it back. So 1 around, that's a second. Pull tight. Mash around as I'm applying a little more tension. And then just like visually check, is it around the hook? Now what's cool about spinning is after you've gotten it around and you walk your thread back through, you're sort of free to keep shoving it around until it looks right. Looks pretty good. So this is where if I took that packer, we're basically at the hook. If I took that packer, I could probably get another half of the amount of shank that I had tied on to expose. I don't really need super poppery head on this one, so we're going to do a little super glue on the thread, chop it with a razor, and gel spun plus super glue equals gonna stay. So a couple drops there, however many wraps to get those drops, and then some whips to get in front of those 6 or 7 wraps. Sitting here salivating looking at that 200 strand. And then at the end of the day, especially when there's striper going on top, I could fish this and maybe have more success. I'm just getting some of that excess ripple ice. Razors by Dorco. Razors by Dorco. This thing stopped recording. I think that means it's been 10 minutes. Alexa, what time is it?
It's 5:32 p.m.
You do whatever you want in terms of cleanliness. I tend to just get hair everywhere and then use my little dust buster. But even putting garbage can that I've drilled holes in and then a screw attached to the leg of my tying desk, you just put that on your lap. That's an option. Cardboard box. Don't need to get too concerned about symmetry, given with the poppers you want it to, as that's it going down in the water, that boop, you need that to be symmetrical, the bottom needs to be right, you need to expose a hook gap, all that stuff. And while you're tying any fly, especially stuff with buoyancy and keel and all these little things, end up making a difference. So I like the fact that with this deer hair version, on the kill, so after you release tension from your strip, it stops. It doesn't want to keep going, so you're just getting a real jerky, and then you can sort of get it going side to side. And so getting that a more vertical shape to the head. And then with keeling and also deer hair, synthetics to a certain degree, but you can put in like a little bit of almost a rudder. I do this with heads on musky flies, just so that head tracks, so thin on the bottom and then wide on the top. I was done with this so long ago. I've had a couple guys recently, somewhat new to fly fishing, or even the ones that are just new to streamer fishing, will see deer hair, or even some of the craft fur, give you a little. Some of the craft fur changes, they're like, oh, is that? That's one of those mice, huh? That's a good looking mouse. Oh, another fun fact about deer hair, it doesn't care which way you tied it in. So you don't always need to. This is like, of the unnecessary things, we are approaching most. Alright, I'm just going to stop. It will certainly fish like this, but for those, I don't know, man, on a pattern like this, especially with shad, having those dots, I'm not going to say eyes are necessary, but it's hard to call them simply decorations. So having a big pupil and you know, you got some yellow, silver, whatever, the shininess. So having that contrast, even if the fish isn't, oh, that's an eye, I'm going to eat the eye. I still don't hate the contrast. I'm just carving out a little flat spot. These are from Fly Tires Dungeon. I'm not gonna lie, I like the The flyman eyes, they're just a little flatter. Again, of the things that don't matter, as I'm carving more. And I really like that. This is like a compliment sandwich. I like that that company has supported. I don't know what it looks like behind the scenes or on paper, but supporting Blaine and what he does, and he's his own guide, designs flies. I'm in the process of that, and so I respect the shit out of that. So between that and then Chase Fish Chase Flies on Instagram, doing it with the spiral spook. And then I see the latest and greatest. It's a crease fly. Alexa, what's a crease fly?
From moviecultists.com. A crease is a line, ridge, or groove in a paper or fabric, made by pressing, folding,
Alexa,
or wrinkling with.
What is a crease fly?
From saltwaterflies.com. Crease flies are key patterns for fish which feed on top.
Top water. Alexa, who invented the crease fly?
From thefisherman.com. One such design and technique was the inspiration of Captain Blados and lead to the creation of the crease fly, a pattern intended to mimic the profile of menhaden.
I don't even have to know what I'm talking about. Anyways, that's a captain. That's someone's design from being on the water, and Flyman marketed it as their own, like the latest and greatest fish catching. So, not that it matters too much to their bottom line, but I'm out after that. You can't be as close as you are in the tying industry to be producing that number of materials and working with people like Blaine and Chase and Zenyo, and then just lift very publicly a design off of someone. Just a little jump up on the soapbox there at the end. I would say this is bone dry, but it isn't, so I would be lying to you. It's mostly the Solera's medium. I have ordered some of the bone dry flex. Pretty darn excited about that. But this is legit. And there's really not a lot of bone dry in here, so the viscosity, it's a little thicker. And that's something else I'll offer you. It's like the more simple a fly is, the more I want to talk about other stuff, because I can't just make it easy. But just tie some craft fur to a hook. If you took a pinch of craft fur and tied it to a hook and threw it into these fish that I've seen that feeding is why I wanted to tie this, that piece of craft fur on a piece of metal would absolutely smoke fish. But this is super cool. So yeah, with UV, if you want to put more on the bottom, I'll even put some glitter, a couple pieces of that ice wing, make a little drop coming down, a flex, and then that promotes keeling and drops buoyancy a little bit, so it'll sink more. This is foam with tinfoil, so that especially on the on the bigger hair bugs, bigger flies. Oh, yeah, one right here. And I don't have to worry about my eyes or my fingers. Critter Minter. If you didn't go too dense and you're not worrying about eyes or really going crazy with the head shape, which is not necessary, this has got to be under 10 minutes. I don't think I've ever tied one under 10 minutes, but that's because I don't like to tie that way. So, bass, I mean, anything. Catch yourself a muskie on one of these. Do whatever you want. Have fun.